The leader is a leader because he is a servant. This leader is someone who inspires his followers, her followers.
Through our series of TutuTalks, the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation hopes to reframe unresolved issues within civil society and uncover what moral and ethical leadership entails.
Swaady, thank you very much for joining us today. I've really been looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Feeling very blessed to be here with you today.
Awesome. So let's start by you telling us about your background and where you are from.
I grew up in Liberia, in West Africa, basically in Liberia, Senegal, Ivory Coast. And I was basically there until I was 16, and then I went on to study in the UK, in Switzerland, and then went on to work in different places. So I've lived in 11 countries, spread over different continents: Africa, Europe, America, and Asia. So I'm truly like a global citizen.
Indeed, a child of the world.
Or Pan-Afropolitan.
Yes, and your parents?
My father is African American, and my mother is French, Ivorian, and Guinean. So also a multicultural background. But if you were to scan my heart, you would see it as the shape of Africa. So my heart really beats to Africa.
Wow. What was your childhood like?
Well, growing up in West Africa in the 80s, it was a time of, coups and political instability, and it started, with all this turmoil, and then the rise of multi-party, from a single party to multi-party. So I would say for the first 20 years of my life, I grew up in this constant bubbling of political instability, of redefinition of what our nations would look like, and what even African leadership should be. And that has definitely nurtured a sense of how am I going to be the change that I want to see? And what kind of African leader do I want to be? And what is my contribution to the continent? There was literally not a moment or not a year when something was not happening. And so it's really that background of upbringing I've had. And in addition to that, my father was a Black Panther Party leader. So I already had that, I would say, within me. My maternal grandfather was an opponent to Sékou Touré. So there was already that, I would say, revolutionary, consciousness in my upbringing. And in addition to that, just being on this ground where change was happening.
What did you want to do when you grew up?
Well, I was very aware of my privilege, in the sense that, like I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of poverty around, and being able to have an education, have shelter, have food, just have a life that was basically free from any hardship. It doesn't make you unaware of what you see around you. And that sense of privilege also came with a sense of responsibility, because I was looking at myself, and I was looking at some other children I would play with in the neighborhood, and there was really nothing that differentiated us. Really, I mean, there was nothing that would say why one is more privileged than the other. I was not better than them. I was not. There was nothing, and at that moment, I would say there was a real sense of what I have is also the others. So this sense of my gift is your gift and your gift is my gift. And the idea of we're all different pieces of a puzzle coming together to create that humanity we want to create. And so in that sense, I would say I was probably I was having a lot of fun, but there was definitely a part of me that has always been very serious, where I took it as a responsibility that everything I do is for also, the bigger community. That's that sense of Ubuntu. I am because we are, really.
Hmm. So, what did you study, and what was your career trajectory like?
I went on to study business, and later on, and then I worked for a while, and then I did an MBA. And I'm constantly learning. Uh, at this point, after my MBA, I really made a point that every year I should study something new. So yeah, so in now the past few years, I've been really studying more of theology, and very passionate about religious literacy and comparative religions. But that's kind of where my interest has been for a while, but now I'm studying this more. But otherwise, many moons ago, because I'm not a spring chicken anymore, I did go to business school.
And from business school, what career path did you take?
So after business school, I started working for an American multinational called General Electric, and I had a career there for 12 years. I was very fortunate that I had a really good career. I was promoted almost every 18 months. So by the time I was 33, I think I was running a $500 million business in Africa. And I really had this incredible opportunity to learn from amazing people, from elders. And my goal was really to be an entrepreneur. And so after 12 years at General Electric, I felt that it was the time for me to now start my own business. And I didn't start quite directly. I first joined some friends who were building a tech startup in Nigeria. So I joined them for a couple of years just to also be exposed to the entrepreneurial environment. And then after that, I started my tea company. And then from that, once you start your first business and it takes a while and you learn and you fall and you rise and you fall again and you rise again and you fall again, you kind of become used to it. And then, since then, I've built a publishing business as well and some other also activities. So now I'm more like a serial entrepreneur.
A serial entrepreneur. I think for some people that's a scary prospect because there's a lot of risk and failure involved. What made you go into that kind of life?
I believe that the entrepreneurial spirit was always in me because even when I was working for corporate, I was an intrapreneur, so I was an entrepreneur inside of the company. So I think it's just more a personality trait. I like to create new things. I like to solve problems. I like to trailblaze. I'm fearless about doing things maybe that haven't been done before. It excites me. It gives me an opportunity to be creative. But it's also interesting talking about the concept of serial entrepreneur as a woman. And if we talk, it's the month of August now, and it's Women's Month. And it's really interesting because once I started having different businesses, I had some people really concerned that I was being distracted or scattered. And I was like, how interesting is that? Because when a man is a serial entrepreneur, he commands more I would say admiration and wow, this man has different businesses, is a serial entrepreneur. And then when a woman has different businesses, she's scattered. So, I thought it's very interesting to challenge this perception, especially because women are, the queens of multitasking. So it's actually very natural even for a woman to be a serial entrepreneur because that's how we operate in life. We raise children, we're mothers, sisters, business owners, employees. I mean, we're doing all these things. So it's not about being scattered. We've actually learned to, as I would say, even the collective consciousness of women, it is in our fabric to be multitaskers. So it's really interesting that there is this perception that a woman who is a serial entrepreneur would be scattered and not focused.
Mm,
But I'm enjoying the ride.
that sounds wonderful. What have you learned in your journey about leadership, and what type of leader would you describe yourself as?
Yeah, it's. Thank you for the question. It's African leadership, and leadership in particular is something, as shared earlier, that I've been always passionate about, and my own journey has been a constant evolution. And of course, in my early years, and I would say up until my mid 30s, I was very much passionate about doing. And so the doing, I would say from age 15 to 35, so for 20 years, the doing had different ways of showing up. So it started as a teenager in marching and protesting, and with friends when we had the conflict in Ivory Coast, we were writing a newspaper and we were trying to spread political ideas. So it was very much that kind of activism when I was younger. It was in the streets, and it was that fire. And then of course you start working, and work takes a lot of your energy, so and time. So you don't have that time necessarily for me to go and march and so and also I don't think it was really a matter of time, but at that point I thought, now that I'm in a business environment, how can I use this business environment to make change? And this is where also in terms of leadership, the ways my leadership was manifesting was different. In that moment, I really wanted to bring technology, knowledge, knowledge transfer, jobs. It really was more in that, I would say I was more focused on the economy. So the next step once I was in corporate is how do we use businesses to empower Africa and to make a difference in Africa? And so there was this aspect, and within my company, I was in charge of the G Women's Network for Africa. So it was also, I've always been passionate also with women empowerment. So it was really how do I use where I am to make change? And then that lasted until I would say I yeah my mid 30s. And in the meantime, also I became an entrepreneur, and all same. I thought, well, leadership is how do we employ people, and I developed an interesting concept with my company in terms of the type of business environment I wanted to have. But it was still, I would say, it was in the continuation of the type of leadership that I exercised in corporate, but slowly it was transitioning to, I would say, the big haha moment, which was to actually make change on the outer, you need to change on the inner. And this is really where I am, where I realize that actually the real change is an inner change. And once we are able to change inside, then we'll see that change manifesting outside. So there is accountability on what type of leader I am like, and I think this is where people like the Archbishop Desmond Tutu are big inspirations of mine. Is how do we really move beyond being, I would say, a servant leader to what I would say is the leader I aspire to be. I aspire to sacred leadership.
Hmm. And how have you implemented that in your businesses?
Well, I'm in the sacred leadership, which is really the type of leadership I'm currently passionate about. Manifest in this way is one, as the CEO, the owner, the leader of my company. How do I show up every day in my environment in a way that actually brings peace and healing to the people I work with and all the stakeholders? And it's not just my people who work directly for me and with me, but also the suppliers, the customers, and how do I develop a framework where now I really practice this idea of sacred leadership and Ubuntu at every interaction. So in terms of even title, I changed my title from the CEO to the Chief Zen Officer. And that was also to put some accountability, because I think when you're the Chief Executive Officer, there is that idea, that very masculine energy is like, executive decision. But when you're the Chief Zen Officer, it's really like, how do you, you now have the responsibility for the peace within your company. You have responsibility for the compassion within your company. You have responsibility for the understanding and the healing. And so that's, in terms of my posture, was already that, that posture, and how do I show up in my business. And then in terms of, and I'll give a few examples, in terms of recruitment, I also really wanted to apply transgenerational learning. We live in societies where elders are more and more pushed out, because there is this worshipping of youth and eternal youth, actually. Whereas there is still a lot of there is a lot to learn from our elders. And I started hiring retrenched people and elders. So at some point in my company, I think the average age was like 60 years old,
Oh, wow.
which which is also something that is not very common. I mean, it's highly uncommon, And I mixed the elders with some people, who came from the township and who had that drive and that youth, and how can they learn, and that would accelerate also their learning, because I think there's just so much to learn from the elders. So that was one of the examples. I started also to give other types of responsibilities to my employees and really see what is their gift. So you could be a packager, but maybe you have an incredible gift for cooking. And so how do we within the company help you also to nurture and develop those other gifts you have? And so that meant I had to spend a lot of time knowing the people I worked with, and so that was also part of being the chief Zen officer. And over time, of course, you try and you test, and then it becomes just very natural. But these are some of the practices. If you think about and talk about sacred leadership in action, is how do basically the work, which is where we spend most of our time, becomes an environment where we reconnect with ourselves first, we connect with others, and really we reconnect with the environment around, including nature.
And are most of your employees women? Are there specific challenges that they face that you need to support them with?
Yes, I have to say I didn't have like a particular policy in terms of trying to hire more women, but it just happened more naturally that I've always had more women. And we've always had remote work that was possible. So we didn't wait for COVID. So that's something that has been in action in my company since day one. And the reason being, I'll give you a statistic. In South Africa, where my company operates, 60% of children are raised by single moms. And so, what does that mean in terms of your employees? So, I'll give a few statistics. So, 60% of children are raised by single moms. We're the eighth country with the largest number of suicide. We have a population where at least a third of the population has suffered some kind of abuse. We obviously have a high rate of rape, and we also have a lot of mental. We also have high rates of mental illnesses. And so this is when you look at the population, obviously our history, etc. And so what I realize is that my company is a microcosm of the macro. And so within my company, I'm going to find all these people. I'm going to have to find people who are raising their children alone, people who have been abused, people who are suffering from various chronic or mental diseases, etc. And usually in companies, we don't want to know about people's private life. You know, there is this idea of to be professional once you come to work, you have to act professional, which is you basically shut down everything that is personal. And as a result, we actually don't know what people are carrying inside of them. And so for me, sacred leadership is to say, no, you are spending most of your time in the company. So there is time. I want to know what's going on if you want to share, but I'm open to listen. I'm open to create a sacred space where you can actually share what it is that you're carrying every day when you come to work. And then my commitment to you is, how do I use this work environment to be a healing place for you? So by the end of the day, as you go back home, it didn't add a load to what you're already carrying, but it actually lifted a load. And as you create that, you actually find that people are more motivated. They're really happy to come to work. I had times where I literally had to beg some of my employees to go back home on weekends because now they felt too good at work. And it was like, no, now you need to go home. But in a sense, you know, it also felt good because I also felt, well, you've managed to create an environment where people really feel good. And even I see today with my team, we have no work. You know, if I reach them on a Saturday or even on a Sunday, because sometimes that happens, there's never a moment where they feel like, oh, you know, it's my weekend, because actually it's become so flowy in a sense that there's just this trust, and this relationship is really a strong trust, that it becomes not so burdensome. And so I think that's also a way, if we think about our African values and we actually pause for a moment and think about what does real African leadership look like? Because we tend to import some models from the West, and the world tends to have this, not the world, because I think if you go to places like China and all, they have very strong cultures and they tend to have their own types of leadership. But I would say in Africa, we've tend to um, absorb leadership styles from the West, which are actually not fully adapted to our own cultures, and we find that eventually it just creates a lot of stress, a lot of angst in our community. And if we were to think about what are actually our values, our African, what makes the fabric of our cultures, of our communities, and how does that translate into real African leadership that actually elevates people, uplift, empower, and heal? Because as Africans, it's a continent that needs a lot of healing. I mean, we've been suffering so many hardships throughout the continent for so many centuries. So we are populations, our leadership styles have to be, uh, you know, our African leadership is a leadership that requires a component. How how is the leader also a healer?
Hmm. You are quite heavily influenced by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, as I learned in our previous conversation. What have you learned from him that you are that really guides you in your work?
Well, I mean, first of all, I love his humor, and it's really beautiful to witness that joy, and really joy is a theme, that, from, of course, the readings. I just know the Archbishop from what I read and what I've seen, as a public persona, but joy is a theme that was really important to him, and I feel that it's that joy of the inner child, especially on a continent again where we've had to endure so much and we continue to endure so much. How do you still connect to the inner joy in the midst of all these hardships? And I think that already this lightens the burden. So that's something that I'm very inspired, how he managed to still uplift, um, people even in the most difficult situations. And of course, I'm very inspired by the type of leadership which is really centered around human values. And I love his ideals of compassion. And for me, compassion is central to any dealings. And I find that we say the word compassion, but lots of times we actually don't apply it, and certainly not in a Western type of leadership. And the Arch, has not used it just as a word. He's embodied it. And I see very few leaders who actually embody that true compassion, especially in a context that was so challenging, so difficult, so violent, and really soul depleting and soul shattering. But even in there, he managed to to seed, harvest, and bloom compassion. And that for me is just extraordinary.
You mentioned earlier that you have a publishing company. Can we talk about that side of you?
Yeah, sure. I've been writing children's books since I was a child myself, and I did that as just kind of one of the things I love to do. And I guess it's one of those things, it's always in you, and there is a moment where it's finally time to share with a broader community. And during the COVID, as the whole world became really quiet, I really had that opportunity to focus on this other passion of mine, which is writing children's book. And I wanted to set it up as my own publishing company, because I also wanted in the future to have the opportunity to publish other people and not just my own stories. And so that has been really exciting. Actually, at the moment, I'm writing a book. For the past 2 days, I'm writing a new book I'm very excited about. And I'm writing a children's book on a wonderful African woman inspiration, and I'm very excited about that. So in the past few days, I've just been like,
Wow. What are your
yeah.
books about?
Well, I always want to. I mean, my one of my passions, is religions in general and spirituality. So I've been passionate about religions and spirituality for more than 25 years now. And so this, of course, is something where I resonate also with the Archbishop as as someone from the church. Of course, a lot of the things he spoke about and he embodied resonate with me. And so I wanted to also use all these learnings that I've acquired throughout decades now of learning about spiritualities and religions from all around the world, but also self-development techniques and so on. And how um, I guess as I'm becoming an elder now, how do I now um, share this knowledge with the next generation? And I think the publishing company came, it's different seasons of life. And I feel like now I'm in the season where now I'm sharing everything that I've learned over the years. There was the previous season was more about contributing in the sense of how do I build a company, and developed talents and supported people in following their dreams. And now it's like, okay, I've learned so much working in corporate and leading a business, building my own businesses, and also in my various passions, all the things that I've learned, and how now this becomes something that I can transmit to the next generation. And so last year, for example, I did a training on traditional African storytelling. I went back to university in Abidjan, and I was trained by a traditional African storyteller, and all that really in the spirit of how do I now transmit, share all this knowledge that I've been acquiring over the past 45 years.
Hmm. What
And
else are
that's
you
what you see.
doing to make a contribution?
What else?
Mm. You said you're a multitasker,
Well,
so there must be other things.
it's yeah, I mean it's something that is constantly obviously evolving, but some of the projects that I'm currently doing, other than my publishing a company which is called the Loving Kindness Boma, and I think that speaks for itself. It's really the place of togetherness where we share stories that embody and exude loving kindness. And other than that, I have a nonprofit which is called Tunche Global Consciousness Summit. I organize an annual and sometimes twice a year Global Consciousness Summit. Within that, we also have other activities for a year. Last year, post the George Floyd traumatic event, which was shared with the entire world and traumatized so many people. Um, I had a racial healing and reconciliation circle for a year. Some other activities along those lines that I'm developing with other people. So the whole principle of Tunche is how do we raise the collective consciousness and bring more diversity, healing, understanding. So I'm very passionate about that. And I'm currently working on building an institute of a center for the study of mysticism and sacred scriptures. So that's also something I'm busy right now
Sure.
doing. So you'll hear more about it in the next couple of years.
Wow, that's awesome. Why do you do all of this? What troubles you about the world?
So what drives me is at every point of time is how do I contribute to make the world a more compassionate and loving place with all the gifts that I have, but also the gifts that I acquire along my journey. And so if if I think of the Center for the Study of Mysticism and Sacred Scriptures, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how also do we bring more peace. And we see that right now there is a lot of violence that is driven by religious illiteracy. And a lot of, especially for us in West Africa, a lot of the youth is being recruited into extremist religious movements, increase of terrorism, and of course, there are many factors to that. We have a legacy of conflict in the region and different challenges, and so people are hopeless, and they tend to be more vulnerable into joining those extremist groups. So in that and it's not just it manifests in that way in West Africa, for example, and some parts of the Middle East, but you also see that in Western countries, people are becoming much more intolerant towards other people's religion.
So, just as a last question, what would you say to young people that are trying to find out what it is they can contribute to the world?
Well, I feel that what is really important is to operate from what I called aligned stillness. And so aligned stillness has two parts: alignment, which we have to seek, alignment with ourselves, alignment with our purpose, alignment with the environment, so which is a kind of reconnection and grounding, and stillness. And really, at every point of time, being able to make an audit of where we are. Am I agitated inside? And if you are agitated from the inside, whatever is going to come out of you, whatever is your contribution, is going to have this energy of of chaos in a way. Then different levels of chaos. And so there is this really responsibility that we have to nurture. And that's really what I want to share. A lot of times people come to me and say, "Oh, Swaady, you're so serene, you're so peaceful, and what have you done?" And I've been cultivating it for 30 years. It doesn't happen overnight. There's no quick recipe. It's just a commitment of 30 years plus. in that. And this is what I also want to say to the youth is you can start making this commitment already when you are young, because as you evolve in your journey, it will definitely manifest into a very I would say easy ride.
Swaady, thank you very much for sharing all your wisdom and for all the contribution that you're making in the world.
Thank you. Thank you to you too. Thank you to the foundation, and really was so grateful for the legacy of our Archbishop. So thank